a Russian Orthodox church. So my Christian background is in Eastern Orthodoxy. So I grew up in an American Orthodox church, but my dad went to a Russian Orthodox church. When I went to college in Virginia, I went to a Ukrainian Orthodox church. Then when I came to San Diego, I went to an Antiochian Orthodox church, which is kind of like Middle Eastern Orthodox. And now I go to a Greek Orthodox church. So kind of ran the gamut for sort of my upbringing, but Eastern Christian background is my
Could you say just a little bit more for me, if not for anybody else, about the Antiochian as opposed to Greek Orthodox? Is there a difference in teaching? Because I mean, ancient Antioch was, but I don't know if there's any connection to the.
So the Orthodox Church as it exists today is basically a bunch of independent or autonomous churches that are all in communion with each other. We don't have a single pope. There's not one person who's in charge. And in fact, we always joke around like, oh, you don't like organized religion, you would love Orthodoxy. It's just a hot mess of, it's all disorganized. So the Antiochian Church is one of a few dozen churches that's centered in present-day Syria, but Antioch was the seat of the church. Whereas the Greek Orthodox Church is Constantinople, present-day Istanbul. That's where the seat was. So, yeah. So anyway, so that's my background growing up. So I've always been really interested in kind of really digging into those ancient Christian practices. One of those ancient Christian practices that I started reading about a number of years ago was contemplation of nature. This is something that the monks do, for sure, but even lay people are encouraged to do it. So contemplation of nature, it's this ancient practice of basically trying to see and find God in and through nature. Right? It's about kind of looking at nature and seeing what it reveals about the Creator. Right? It's kind of hard to say anything really positive about God the Father, right? The Godhead. We can say plenty about Jesus, right? But God, the Godhead is kind of beyond, right? Ineffable, just totally kind of hard to describe. But we can learn about him through his creation, right? So that's kind of the idea. And so, growing up, I loved nature. I was a Boy Scout. I spent a lot of time hiking outdoors, and it was like a second church being outside, right? I always found just sort of majesty and just beauty and God's presence, really, like looking at star-strewn sky, looking at a majestic landscape, looking at the complexity of animals and how they behave, and so when I started grad school, this was 2007, I knew I was going to study sharks. I don't remember exactly why I became so interested in sharks. But I do remember, so when I was an undergrad, I did a study abroad in Australia for a semester, and I remember I was doing research for a class in the Great Barrier Reef, and we were scuba diving, and I remember seeing my first wild shark, and I was like, it wasn't scary, and it was like peaceful. And then I became frustrated because I couldn't get closer. I was trying to get closer to see the shark, and it was very skittish, and it just swam away. And so I became interested in sharks.
You wanted it to be less skittish, huh?
I wanted to be one with the shark and see the shark. And so one area of interest of mine, so my research now is in shark behavior, specifically the movement patterns of sharks. So I study their migration patterns, their schooling behaviors, and I try to understand what the implications of those behaviors are for their conservation. Do some of their, where they go, during the year, does that put them maybe at greater risk for being caught by fishers or something like that? And so I'm very interested in shark conservation. And part of shark conservation is people's perception of sharks. Right, so for example, in the US, we have the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which is arguably the most comprehensive protective measure for any group of animals on the planet. It's since the 1970s, you basically cannot touch, kill, harm, give dirty looks. You can't, they're totally protected marine mammals. We have nothing like that for sharks. Because people don't love sharks the way they love marine mammals. Right? We love dolphins and whales and seals. Because people love those animals, they put pressure on their politicians to enact conservation measures to protect them. People don't feel the same way about sharks. They're kind of hard to love, right? Occasionally they bite people, they kill people, people make scary movies about them, they infest waters. Thought about that? Like, that's just so ridiculous. You can't infest your own home, right? They're infested with sharks, they're infested with dolphins, seals, turtles. You never hear turtle-infested waters. But anyways, I've been interested in, like, you know, people's perception of sharks and why people don't like sharks. And it's obvious, right? But I've also seen sharks as kind of like an opportunity for me as a Christian to kind of like let go of like my, I don't know, my perceptions of nature or whatever, and just like, this is one of God's creatures too, and I need to get over myself. Everyone's got to get over themselves and love sharks just as much as they love any other animal. So I'm writing a paper now, and the paper is about hard to love animals, especially like the theological implications of these hard to love animals. But I'm trying to go beyond sharks and wolves and ordinary predators. Right? That's interesting, or we can talk about that. But I'm talking about animals that exhibit behaviors that are so offensive that people have questioned whether God could even coexist with these creatures. How could he possibly have created such things? And so I'm going to tell you about some of these animals and, you know, why I think they're interesting and the kinds of questions that I think are interesting that comes from it. But getting back to like that ancient practice from my faith tradition, contemplating nature, you can't just contemplate some nature. It's all or nothing. And so I see contemplating these very offensive animals as an opportunity. What do they reveal about God and the way that he creates? What do they reveal about, you know, just creation itself? So, any questions so far, or should I just start talking about these animals?
Well, no, you're doing great.
Any other setup, though, before we get into it?
You didn't mention sea lions.
Oh, yeah.
You know, seals. No, you're doing great.
Sea lions kill leopard sharks, so
Oh, well.
kind of vicious.
Gotcha.
But I know we're pointless. I like them. I feel it's a guy. You know,
Yeah.
All right, so the first animal. It's called the emerald cockroach wasp. That's good. You ready for this?
Oh, man.
So Charles Darwin famously was very disturbed by this family of wasps, a taxonomic family of wasps. And so in the 1860s, right after The Origin of Species was published, he wrote a letter to his friend and colleague who was a botanist in America. And he specifically mentioned, like in his writings, he never meant to write atheistically, but he acknowledged that he just couldn't get over the existence of this one family of wasps and how that, you know, how a creator could have expressly designed these wasps to be as they are. So let me tell you about these wasps. When it comes time to reproduce, the female wasp finds a host. Not like a party host. You know where this is going. Turns out it's a cockroach. But some species of in this family of wasps, they might target other hosts like caterpillars and things like that. But this one that I'm telling you is a cockroach. So I'm going to act it out. The wasp finds its cockroach host. First order of business, stings it in its brain. The sting is just in the right spot of the brain, and the venom is just perfectly formulated, and the amount of venom is just perfect, just enough to basically hypnotize the cockroach and disable its escape response. So now it's just sitting there, like just
Wow.
looking at the wasp, right? The wasp then approaches it from the front and proceeds to chew off half of each antenna. It's a little snack. Of course, the antenna starts to bleed, so the wasp sips the exuding blood from the antenna.